Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We are glad to have you joining us, and August is here. College football is happening this month, so we wanted to take an episode to look at some of the players who we think you should look out for, not like the obvious, likely All-American or Heisman types. I mean, there's 134 teams this season and plenty of exciting folks that may not make that cut, but they are no less interesting and dynamic. So we're going to take an opportunity to list our 10 guys, our 10 dudes, if you will, who can make the game fun to watch and should be on your radars this upcoming season. Before we dive in, though, let me take a second to remind you can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Take a moment, if you can, to like, rate, and subscribe. So, Sean, first of all, how's everything going? How's daycare, all that stuff going well for the kiddo?
Yeah. Thankfully, everybody at the daycare is raving about how easy she is, thankfully. So that's been good. She hasn't cried so far since being there. And, we feel really good about the place, thankfully. So it was a little bit of a weird experience, certainly, leaving our daughter with basically strangers. But thankfully, it's one of those things, right? Like, I feel like when you go and she's in a good mood, you're like, okay, she doesn't feel unsafe here, right? She feels like she's being supported and her needs are being taken care of. And so if that's the case, I think like that helps you feel a little better about it. The other thing too was I went down last night to a like Baylor coaching event, basically, where basically they do like a mixer with some of the staff. So I didn't get to see my daughter basically at all yesterday, which was I mean, like, you get so used to her being around all the time that it's very weird when suddenly she's not. But that was a good time too. I got to catch up with some people, and you'll be shocked to know me and Dave Aranda had the most intense conversation about books, and so that was a lot of fun.
Okay, you can't just leave that hanging. What kind of books?
Well, so he was asked by somebody else at our table. He was like, like, oh, what's your favorite book? Which obviously that's like, especially for people who read. And I've been in and out of reading certainly the past couple of years because just life is very busy. But for people who read, that's like an impossible question, right? Like, that's like, how do you really answer a question like that? But I brought up the book Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson as like one that really impacted my worldview when I read it, like in high school or college. And so we ended up talking about everything from Goodnight Moon to Carl Jung. So it was perfect. It was exactly the experience that I would want. And so no, but that staff is they're a lot of fun. I mean, we'll see whether they're any good next year, but it's always good to go and stop by.
No, that's awesome. And, I always like learning a little bit about coaches when they're not just coaching. Some coaches are just, that's their entire life. And then you get like the Mike Leaches that are like everything else as well, in addition to what they're doing. And it's always fascinating to learn more about the personalities, especially since, people are dynamic and three-dimensional overall.
Yes, especially that dude. Especially
Yeah.
that dude.
Well, it's interesting too, because I mean, I'm thinking about the stage of life I'm in. My kids are 12 and 10, and I shipped them off to a stay away camp, for or sleep away, pardon me, but really stay away.
Stay away.
Yeah. I love my kids, but at the same time, I get kind of thrown off when they're gone for that long, because I'm like, okay, I don't have to rush anywhere, especially in the summertime when there's no like busing or whatever. You got to pick them up and drop them off.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. But enough about that. Let's get into this list. So this is something, and I'd love to hear your take on it, because this is an idea, and you come up with so many of our great ideas for these episodes. What's your thought on this show and the theme we're kind of running with right now?
So the way that I thought to frame it, right? We talked about kind of our deep dark horse teams last week, just teams that maybe are outside of like your normal viewing patterns, I guess you could say, right? Like, and certainly we talked about Rutgers. We got a little bit of attention for that. I think you got an email from somebody pointing out that they noticed your Rutgers playoff pick, which I love. And so for me, I think that this was an opportunity to kind of say, who are the players that are kind of that equivalent? Maybe ones who are not going to be All-Americans or not going to be first round NFL draft picks necessarily. I kind of had a blend of picks between like, hey, this is a player who's good right now and maybe is just like on a team that doesn't get enough attention or who could shape the season but isn't being talked about in that way, or guys who I think like could just have a big impact or a big role or maybe be breakout players again on who aren't talked about. And for the most part, I tried to not mention anybody that we've talked about on the show because I was having this conversation a little bit with someone yesterday. It's like we talk so much, right? We talk 2 hours a week about college football, 52 weeks a year, and eventually you're just saying the same stuff. Right? You're just saying the same stuff over and over again. And so I wanted to get outside a little bit and kind of say, look, maybe this one player won't like change the playoff race, but if it's a Saturday and college football's on and there's not sort of a game that you would normally be following, maybe this is a guy worth tuning in for and paying attention to.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's exactly it because as I was doing the intro, I almost wanted to say, look, especially when we get into November, there's going to be games almost every day of the week for like a solid month, except for, Sundays because that's the NFL's day. So it's a real opportunity, and the Monday because that's also the NFL's day. But I mean, it's an opportunity to really to see other teams and kind of help you pick and say, oh wow, this team's on a Friday or a Wednesday or Tuesday or Thursday. Like check this one out. I think that's a great opportunity to do so. So yeah, I can kick us off this time. Why not?
Let's
So
do
I
it.
was I was debating between two players because I tried to not. I didn't want to use two players from the same team, but there were players who you kind of like. Well, I could go with one or I could go with the other. Um, and the first one I want to go with is KJ Jefferson at UCF. Really exciting player. Obviously, he played for many years at Arkansas. Great decisions, good accuracy, broke a lot of records actually with the Razorbacks. He certainly can run, and he's got a big frame for a quarterback. I mean, he's not the tallest. He's 6'3". He's still tall, 247 pounds. But then the exciting thing is he's going to be part of like one of the most incredible potentially rushing offenses out there, especially when we see how they take advantage of the fact that they've got RJ Harvey, who's still, great 1,000 plus, I think 1,400 yard plus rusher. And then they've got triple transfer Penny Boone, who's joining that particular backfield. They've got a couple of speedsters with Johnny Richardson and Miles Montgomery back there to kind of, give him a lot of options. But in addition, I think he's just an exciting playmaker. I think UCF this season kind of may surprise people in some ways. I think, like the rest of the Big 12 editions last season, they kind of stumbled a little bit. They weren't great. They were kind of like everyone was kind of trying to find their way. They had a couple of games that really got that Oklahoma State game was just something else to see it get away from them. But I think this season there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think KJ Jefferson's going to be the face of potentially a really fun program to watch.
I love this pick. No, I think that's really good. And you mentioned all those other guys. Also throw in Kobe Hudson, the wide receiver, who was nearly 1,000-yard guy last year. Their skill talent offensively is as good as anybody. Like truly as good as anybody in the country. The question for them is going to be to some extent that offensive line. And I got a chance to talk to KJ Jefferson back when I was at Big 12 Media Days. They brought him for that. And he's walking around like that dude looks like an edge rusher. That dude does not look like a quarterback. He is just so big, so strong, so broad. But like, again, last year, for a lot of reasons at Arkansas, his career slipped a little bit. But I don't really think it was his fault. I think part of it was the system they brought in going to kind of a pro style type thing with Dan Enos, with an offensive line that was pretty terrible and also not a whole lot of skill talent around him. This is going to be the opposite. This is getting back to business with KJ Jefferson. And so there's a lot of quarterbacks in the Big 12 who I would argue are going to be in like tiers 1 and 2. I don't necessarily think there's the home run number one guy, depending on what you think of Shedeur Sanders, of course. But I think that he statistically, if you say at the end of the year that he statistically was the best quarterback in the Big 12 this year, I don't think I'd be that surprised. We saw flashes of it with just that offense with John Reese Plumlee, but KJ's a different type of player, and I think he's much more developed as a passer as well. So I'm excited to see this group. Like you said, I do think you have to give the shout out to Penny Boone and RJ Harvey and Kobe Hudson as well whenever you talk about this group.
Excellent. Well, who's the first person on your list? I mean, I didn't rank mine. They're just kind of like,
Yeah.
but I mean, but
100%.
who's the first person you want to bring up?
Yeah, well, I'll go with the quarterback that I have on mine, and he's not by any means a no name. Like he's not. But I think that we need to point out what Caden Salter did last year at Liberty. Like he carried that team in so many ways. And they were a good team overall, but that was the difference maker, was adding a player like him. People may remember, I mean, he was a blue chip recruit coming out, went to Tennessee, got into some trouble, ended up landing at Liberty. And I think it's just really worked. That's what you have to say about it, is that it's really, really worked. And he does lose his top target in CJ Daniels, excuse me. But the thing that you love about him as a player, one, is that, I mean, talent wise, he's kind of just like head and shoulders above everybody else in Conference USA. Like there's no other player like this at that level. But the other thing too is that he was nearly a 3,000 yard passer and he was a 1,000 yard rusher. So I mean, he gives it to you in every which way as a player. I think that just gives him so much upside. Like it's tough to truly carry a team as an individual player, but this is the kind of player who can. And the thing that sucks, I mean, we mentioned, right? It's, the idea of flipping on a game in the regular season and potentially seeing this guy on your TV. The thing that is a little unfortunate is not like the most thrilling schedule of all time to get a chance to do that
Somehow
against.
weaker than last season.
Yeah. They go to App State. That's like a game that might be interesting, but like that's probably like the one. That's probably like the one sort of like, ooh, that might be interesting. And I don't know that there's another on this schedule.
And watch, we're gonna jinx it. It's gonna get canceled by a hurricane or something.
Oh
you know,
my
I
gosh.
mean,
No,
hopefully not.
we're gonna jinx it, and somehow Conference USA is gonna sweep all of their non-conference games and be one of the best G5 leagues. I do not think that that's even physically possible, but he's just a fun player to watch. He's a throwback in some ways. He's going to be asked and allowed to do certain things that I just don't think many quarterbacks in this day and age are, because of the freedom and flexibility of that offense. And I think he deserves a shout out.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. I was debating about him only because I'm like, he is prominent enough that
He's on that
I
line.
He was on that line. And even as a G5 guy, like, because I remember, for example, one of my sort of honorable mentions, I actually had him on my list and I took him off because I realized he technically had made a kick returner All-American list last season, was Ismail Mahdi from Texas State, the running back there who was excellent. But yeah, no, I think that's a great pick. My next pick, and this is, I'm just going to get him out of the way because I love the fact that you gave me some crap about picking Rutgers as a potential, like, okay, surprising but not shocking team that could suddenly maybe claw its way into an at-large bid. So I feel like, and then Kirk Herbstreit, like between the time we recorded this and the time it got published, you know, it came out that he was also on Team Scarlet Knight. So I have to bring up Kyle Managa, the excellent running back they have. He runs with so much force. He's able to get through arm tackles. He's one of those types of players that gets stronger and better as the game wears on. Good vision. Last season, he finished ahead of the regular season, ahead of, in terms of total yards, ahead of Blake Corum and Braylon Allen, two excellent Big Ten running backs. He was the first rusher. He was the first rusher at Rutgers to pass 1,000 yards in over 11 years. Last one was Juwan Jameson. So I think, again, if you're going to watch Rutgers, you're going to watch it to see him and the defense. But the defense is a group there. They have a lot of talent across the board. But for that offense, and all respect to Calic McManus. Oh my goodness, well, I tripped over that one. But I think it's going to be it's all this Managa play, and I can't wait to see it. And I hope he makes me right. I hope he makes me a genius. For saying that they could backdoor their way into it. I'm going to be watching them all season and watch me jinx them. It's going to turn into a complete dumpster fire. But you know what? That's what I love about Rutgers. You just, when it can go in any direction over there.
Can it? I don't feel like it's gone very many other directions over the past decade since they joined the Big Ten. But no, I think that Managa is just one of those players who gets lost because of how many good running backs there are in the Big Ten. You talk so much about the Donovan Edwards, the Travion Hendersons, players like that, like a guy who's just a workhorse. I mean, Mo Ibrahim was kind of this guy in some ways at Minnesota a couple years ago, where you just handed the ball and like, yes, his numbers are impressive, but it's also like, oh, okay, everybody knows they're gonna run it. Nobody is defending the pass. They're putting 7 in the box, and if not more, and they're still just making something happen. So I
Yeah.
think he is one of those underrated players. I do say I don't know that in good conscience I can advise you to make them your the flip the TV to this player to watch them do fun stuff guy, but it's more of the like, wow, he's gonna do things extremely effectively. And
It's so funny though. I was so
yeah.
tempted to like say whoever is the starting running back at Minnesota this season. Like I was almost tempted to just say that because, and it's so funny. It's a throwback. When I went to Minnesota for grad school, that was absolutely the Glenn Mason teams that they ran there.
Sure.
They had so many good. They had a back-to-back running backs that were just phenomenal there. That's all Minnesota did. So it's nice to see them go back to that after some really bad years and bad choices in coaching hires. Not Jerry Kill. Not Jerry Kill.
No.
He was a
Jerry
great hire,
Kill
but,
is a legend. Jerry Kill is
yeah.
a legend. I did consider a handful of players on Jerry Kill's new team at Vanderbilt, but I decided ultimately, especially since Diego Pavia is not the starting quarterback officially as yet, I'm not ready quite as yet to do that. Actually, you know what? I'm curious if you had this guy on your list, but I'm going to bring him up now because you brought him up a few times this offseason. From the University of Minnesota, Max Brosmer, the New Hampshire transfer. I know that he's somebody that you've mentioned a couple times. And look, this was one of the best players at the FCS level during his time at New Hampshire. Super, super productive player. Had nearly 3,500 passing yards. And remember, when you hear those numbers, they played less games at that level as well. 29 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. 64% completion. He's played 4 years of football. Like, he is a good big time player. And I think that it's fascinating that he landed at Minnesota because he's from Georgia originally. Like, this is not a Midwestern kid coming home by any means, but certainly I'm sure that he saw the pathway to being a starting quarterback at Minnesota and felt like that was a good opportunity for him. So I really like the fact that they have him coming in. I mean, quarterback was just, and I don't know exactly who to blame, right, when it comes to the quarterback and passing game issues last year, because they had a couple good players. Dylan Wright was back, right? But it was just a disaster at that position. I like bringing in somebody who's experienced, who can maximize what's out there. And I think it also helps buy them some time because they have a couple underclassmen quarterbacks who are interesting, but are just not ready at this point for prime time. The big question with them is going to be, okay, how quickly can we get our receiving room up to snuff in order to give Max Brosmer a couple of legitimate targets? But I think overall, I mean, he's one of those players that like he just, when you're adding a transfer, especially from the FCS level or even the group of 5 level, you need to see snaps. You need to see experience. You can't replace experience. And this is one of the most experienced players at the quarterback position in the transfer portal.
No, I love that pick. I didn't pick anyone from Minnesota, but I think it's exciting to see what they can do there. Only because I don't know if PJ Fleck's ever had a guy like that. And to see if you plug someone in, especially at Minnesota, can they do more than it's expected? Because I always tend to cover the first opener, the home opener at Minnesota. They always love to do it on a Thursday. They started doing that about 12 years ago because it fits perfectly. It's right before Labor
Sure.
Day, so all their freshmen are in orientation, and they don't start until the day after Labor Day. So it's actually it's become like a weird. It's like a new tradition at Minnesota. So
I love it.
I'm going to the
personally. I
North
love
Carolina
it.
game this season to see it, and both teams. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the quarterbacks for both of them.
SMU, man, get on that. Get on that. I'm only 10 minutes away from you. Let me go to a Thursday game to kick off my season.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's like last season, I remember like watching that Nebraska game. I'm like, is Jeff Sims, is the defense really good? And it turns out, no, Jeff Sims needed to work on it a little bit. But both quarterbacks were kind of like having kind of half-assed games in that day. And so you're watching from the press box in week 0 and you're like, what's going on here?
Well, it's like they always say, Big Ten football is to be endured.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best part of that game was getting a chat with Matt Fortuna the entire game. Honestly,
Oh,
that was
nice.
probably the best part about it. But my goodness, I like that pick though, and I think I'm very curious to see how Minnesota turns out this season because, yeah, I don't know. I think again, and I think maybe I've lived here now for 22 years. It's kind of you just are waiting for them to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. That is
Yeah.
absolutely the Minnesota approach to sports. But next on my list is someone who, he's a name, but not a name that people always say is like, oh, this is the best person at their position because it's wide receiver. And there's always some exceptional wide receivers out there. And I'm going with this guy because I think, especially with the quarterback they brought in, he had a good relationship with the previous quarterback, who was a solid one and transferred out. But Xavier Restrepo at Miami, I think there's an
Mhm.
opportunity there for him to take a step and make it really exciting because he has a single season receptions record with 85 catches for the Hurricanes. He passed 1,000 yards this past season. He had excellent chemistry, as I said, with Tyler Van Dyke, who's obviously now going to be at Wisconsin. So to see how he works with Cam Ward, because Cam Ward, I mean, if he takes off, he's going to be in the bigger picture in a lot of awards, a lot of things. But with Xavier Restrepo, and again, they've also got Jacoby George. They've got other great people that are going to be thrown to. But as kind of a symbol of that group, I picked Restrepo because he's the number one receiver in a lot of ways, and I think Miami, if they end up taking off, he's going to be one of the players that makes it fun to watch.
I love it. No, I heavily considered Xavier Restrepo for that reason. I think he's going to be put in so many more interesting, I guess you could say, situations. And they bring over the transfer as well from Houston. I think it's Sam Brown is the guy who transferred from Houston, was their top receiver last year, a top 10 overall player in the transfer portal in the post spring window. So I love what that means for Xavier Restrepo. I think he's going to be able to certainly be a high volume guy and give Cam Ward a lot of help, but also I think it's just going to let him unlock a dynamic part of his game too. So I love the pick. Yeah, let's stick at the wide receiver position. Actually, I'm going to go to the team I just mentioned right in my backyard. I'm going to go to SMU, and they added a transfer. This is a pop off player, not one who's already a must watch guy. So they have a receiver who transferred in from their rival TCU, who, by the way, used to be committed to SMU, named Jordan Hudson. And Jordan Hudson last year, I believe he actually was at SMU last year, was a 400-yard receiver for them, 7 touchdowns, became a really trusted target for Preston Stone at that quarterback position. And this is a player who was one of the true blue chips during his time coming out of school. And they do have some of these players coming back, right? They have a Jake Bailey coming back, RJ Maryland at tight end. But Jordan Hudson is, I think, the key to unlocking more to this team. You even look last year, right? Like 14 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns, despite being a little bit lower on the list of target leaders on this team. I think that he's a player who has a chance to maybe break out heading into his third year as a college football player. And again, just the trust that I think they're going to be able to build between their starting quarterback Preston Stone and Jordan Hudson. I think that's a huge part of my optimism for what they have a chance to be. And by the way, last year, I mean, Preston Stone had a really good year, threw for nearly 3,200 yards despite missing a few games. They didn't have a receiver with more than 528 receiving yards. This is a program that continuously puts great receivers into the NFL, right? Cortland Sutton, James Prochet, like they've had this level of player come through before. Of course, Rashee Rice last year, right, with the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, I think that Jordan Hudson is built to be their next guy if he's ready for that moment.
I like that pick. Now I'm going to go with the quarterback again, only because this one is pure, like fun to watch if he's playing well, and there's some optimism that things are going to be tightened up a little bit this season. And that's a team. I mean, I love it because this team went from being just a boring, low-level P4 team to being kind of everyone's interested to see how this is going to turn out now. And it is Boston College with Thomas Castellanos. Originally UCF transfer, but last season he just I remember seeing people comment on that that BC game was actually really exciting. Like it was a wild ride to watch because again he ran for 1,100 yards in addition to throwing for over 2,200 yards. it was interesting. His total yards last season was the third most by BC quarterback behind Matt Ryan and Doug Flutie, two huge names in the sport. Now, again, dazzling highs, kind of messy lows, just the things you expect from someone who is being asked to suddenly start at the power level. But now they've got Bill O'Brien, someone who can develop, some true talent, develop a good offense. So I'm curious to see how they refine that, and if they make him more exciting to watch, and if he is, and if his game reaches that next level. I mean, BC went to a bowl game for the last season. They weren't awful; they were just kind of mediocre. But can they kick it up a notch? And I'm very curious to see that this season. I think he's going to be a big part of that.
No, I love the pick. I'm curious, right? Because this is going to go one of two ways with Bill O'Brien. Either he's going to unlock him or he's going to put handcuffs on him. When you look at what he did with Bryce Young, I mean, he got a lot of criticism for play calling and stuff in that offense, but he let Bryce Young be himself and really become a big time college football player. I'm hoping that he has a chance to do that as well with Castellanos. It is going to be fascinating. I don't know if you saw who's going to be calling CW games this year. That would be Tom Brenneman, the famous, and there's a hit into left field by Castellanos. Well, now Castellanos is potentially going to be playing on one of his games. So everybody get your major world events ready.
I love it. Who's next for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna take us to the defensive side of the ball, and this is not a small time player. Like, it wouldn't shock me if he ends up being an All-American contender, but I feel like when you start looking on defense, the bar is like a little different, right? Because people don't know these names quite as well. I'm gonna go with Ahmed Hassanian, the defensive tackle rather, from Boise State, and as a largely interior defensive player, 16 and a half tackles for loss, 12 and a half sacks. He was the preseason Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year. And when you look at this Boise State team, the way that things are going to work in so many ways are, it's going to come down to the defense doing its job and being disruptive and causing issues for people, and offensively Ashton Jeanty at running back being the player that we know that he is. And if they can get anything from the passing game, I think they'll feel pretty good about that. But so much of what Boise State wants to do defensively is built on winning in the trenches and winning up the middle. And I'll tell you what, we got a great opportunity over the past decade or so to see just how much interior pressure means because of Aaron Donald. When you can create pressure from the interior, like, you're kind of just like, everybody's kind of just screwed after that, right? Like, if you're in a position where you can't step up in the pocket, all of a sudden you have to start rolling out, you have to start throwing across your body. Like, it just completely changes the way of how you can play quarterback. And I think that Ahmed Hassanian is one of those players who can do that. I'll be fascinated to see him. Look, Boise State going to lose to Oregon, of course. They play them week 2. But I'm going to really be interested to see, can they find, will this player, Ahmed Hassanian be able to get pressure against a really good Oregon offensive line? Will he be able to be disruptive? Not disruptive enough to like end the game, but disruptive enough to impact the game.
Absolutely. I love that pick. And yeah, a game against Oregon, optimistically, that's a stretch for them to actually win that game. But I know scouts will definitely be paying attention to how he does against that kind of offensive line. And I like that pick because again, on the other side of the ball, Ashton Jeanty, he'd be a weird pick because he's actually got a chance to be up there in the All-American conversation. I'm gonna then go with one of my defensive selections, and this is one that his raw talent is undoubted. Like, I don't think he's ever been questioned on that. And he transferred. He was originally at Georgia. But the problem is the team just isn't good at defense. And that's Bear Alexander, the USC defensive tackle. He's an interior guy. And if they're going to be able to, if USC can step up and overhaul the defense with Danton Lynn, of course, Eric Henderson doing the defensive line, he's going to be the center of it. And he has the strength, the explosiveness, the motor, the ability to disrupt the run game and collapse a pocket. But a lot of it relies on whether or not this team can take advantage of it. And he's an interesting guy. I mean, he kind of stepped in the portal but didn't, and then the bag was secured, and I was never going to enter the portal. I love we got to see some of that stuff. So he knows how to look out for his own. Very much what I kind of would expect from yeah. So but yeah, I think if USC's defense can coalesce I'm not saying they have to suddenly turn into, unstoppable defensive force like a Pete Carroll defense, but if they can get competent, he's going to be one of the folks that's going to step up and, be a real force in creating havoc for offenses that typically could just score at will, depending on the USC team they were facing at the time.
Well, and I think that because USC defensively wasn't good last year, I don't think people respected enough how good he was. Like, he was a good player for them last year. It wasn't always consistent, certainly. I don't want to pretend that it was, but I think that he looked like a player who could be a game changer. He looked like a player who was everything like you expected him to be at Georgia. And of course, you also saw some of the inconsistency of why maybe he wasn't the favorite of Georgia coaches at times. But I went on the record right earlier this week. I feel like USC is an undervalued team right now. I think that, the question is going to be how do they restructure themselves? But if they make improvements on defense, and by the way, they've got a great defensive line coach in Eric Henderson, who, like I mentioned, Aaron Donald earlier, that was the dude who coached Aaron Donald the past couple of years with the Los Angeles Rams. I think that Bear Alexander is one of the players, along with I'll point to Anthony Lucas, the other former 5-star transfer from Texas A&M. These are two guys who I think could really have a chance to thrive under new coaching, let's say better coaching, let's say better strategy on the defensive side of the ball, or maybe they haven't made any changes and actually this will all be a disaster. Who knows?
Absolutely. We'll wrap us our first half here. Who's your fifth pick?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I'm going to go with a running back who, again, we've seen flashes of his talent, but I think that there is so much left in the tank. And that's Abu Sama III, the running back at Iowa State. So people might not really know this name very much because he actually wasn't kind of a primary back for Iowa State until the very end of the year. But against Kansas State, he had his coming out party. 16 carries, 276 yards, 3 touchdowns. And if you look back and watch some of his high school tape, and like he was one of those players, just every time he touched the ball, he was a threat for a 90-yard touchdown. He's just that kind of talent, that kind of skill set. The question for him is going to be, can he be a little more consistent when it comes to down stuff, right? Like we saw some of those issues in other games. He had games where he averaged 10 yards per carry. Against BYU, he was 8 for 110 with 2 touchdowns. We also saw games like against Texas, 7 carries, 11 yards. Now, Texas was like the best run defense in college football last year, but Oklahoma State, 8 carries, 7 yards. So Ohio, 3 carries, -5 yards. He has to be more consistent when it comes to a down basis. He can't just rely on the long runs. But this is a really, really dynamic running back. And I've talked about with Iowa State, we really know on the offensive side of the ball at quarterback what they've got going on with Rocco Becht, with at receiver with Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, right? 2 big-time players for them. Defensively, this is a stacked team. Offensive line, they return a lot of production. I think so much of whether this team can reach Big 12 contention will come down to what Abu Sama III can be.
That's a great pick. And Iowa State, as we kind of talked about last episode, they have that opportunity to be one of those teams that could splash into an at-large part if they continue this kind of rise. Because last season, again, was thrown off because of some really wacky stuff that happened in the offseason that took out several players who they were kind of counting on. But yeah, Abu Sama, I know you've said the name before. He's absolutely someone to look out for as we head into this season. Well, when we come back, we're going to run through 5 more players each who we think are folks you should look out for, who aren't necessarily the biggest names in the sport, but will absolutely make games more interesting to watch here on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, in the second half, why don't we you can kick off. We'll kind of reverse the field a little bit. So who's your sixth person that you wanted to bring up in this kind of list? And again, we'll go over all the names at the end, but I'm looking forward to it. This has been interesting, especially since we have yet to overlap, but that kind of speaks to the fact that there's so many exciting players in the sport and teams to choose from.
Yeah, a guy who came to campus incredibly unheralded, on a roster that is full of heralded guys, is linebacker Torian York from Texas A&M. He actually was named a team captain as a sophomore, which I mean, it's like that's pretty crazy for an SEC program as a true sophomore, as a three-star kid who is not guaranteed anything coming in to grow into that kind of leadership role. But he's also a really good player. 74 tackles, 3 sacks last year, a forced fumble as well for Texas A&M. He steps into a role now. And by the way, if you're wondering why he was a little underrated and under recruited, it's because he's quote unquote short. The way that I mean, there's so many linebackers in the history of college football, right? Where it's just like, oh, I don't know, this kid probably isn't worth the offer. And then it's like, well, when you understand football, man, you understand football at a high level. And Torian York is just one of those types of players. I think that one, from a dynamic perspective, I mean, he's just so good at diagnosing tackles and finding rushing lanes and filling them up. But the other piece is I think that his leadership is going to be huge on this Texas A&M team. It's funny. I've talked about all offseason that I love the fact that Texas A&M is leaning into more of the blue collar thing, that they are focusing on the work, not doing all the talk. And I actually wrote a story yesterday about walk-ons, and certainly when you look at the 80s and 90s, the wrecking crew under RC Slocum, like they really leaned on walk-ons, and Texas A&M has a strong walk-on history. And Torian York was like the 387th best player in America. I don't want to pretend that he was like, a walk-on or a two-star or anything like that, but this is somebody who had to grind a little bit to get to this level, to be a starter at Texas A&M as a freshman. And I think that having a player who has that edge and
Mhm.
who has integrated themselves so quickly with the coaching staff, that's what it's all about, right? Like it's about having guys like this who set the tone in your locker room. And I think Torian York, he's gonna have to do it without Edgerrin Cooper, who was one of the probably 3 best linebackers in America last year, with Peyton Wilson certainly. I think that he is the kind of table setter who can change a unit.
I think that's a great pick. Only because a lot of excitement for Texas A&M, especially the defense, with someone who actually understands the defense already from coaching it before and is now taking over with Mike Elko. And this could be a real opportunity for a guy like that to shine. And clearly, there's so much. I mean, obviously, so much has been said about the cupboard there. Even obviously Jimbo had put together and paid for it, but I think this is an opportunity, and I'm looking forward to that one. I like that pick a lot. So I'm going to go back to another running back, and this is one I remember when we started to do our ACC shows. You guys were like, "Who?" And then I'm like, by the second show, everyone was like on board with it, and that's Cal's Jaden Ott. And I think it's the weird thing. It's because it's one of the new additions, one of the Pacific Coast ACC teams. We've talked about him quite a bit. He's highly explosive. He really just burst onto the scene 2 seasons ago as a true freshman, where he ran for nearly 900 yards and 8 touchdowns, and then he took a step up last season. But again, part of the problem was Cal went 6-7, so you kind of get a little forgotten when your team isn't necessarily stellar. But again, he was carrying for more than 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns. He was by far Cal's best player. And there's going to be opportunities here for him to demonstrate his talent. I mean, they're going to be on the road at Auburn this next season, in addition to the ACC schedule. So there's going to be platforms for Cal to show that, no, check out this guy. He is a top running back. He has that opportunity to go into the league. And I think he's going to be an interesting player to watch. And I think he's one who, again, there's some exceptional running backs out there. I mean, and I think just by the very nature of just being at Cal, Jay Knott doesn't get the attention that he deserves.
No, honestly, I considered him. I felt like he was, I guess he was my Ishmael Mahdi, right? Where I felt like, oh, is he maybe even a little too good to be
Yeah.
considered? But like, Actually, ironically, right, got to stop by and talk to the Baylor coaches last night, and I talked to Jake Spavital for a while about Jaden Ott because he is just such a special player. I think for me, like he is the engine that makes that team go, and I love what they have offensively, but it all starts with him. And I think that this is a perfect time to go to the other super duper proud All Coast Conference program, the Stanford Cardinal. Alik Eomanor, the wide receiver from Stanford, just a big time player. Everybody watched the game that he played against Colorado, 13 catches,
Colorado.
294, 3 touchdowns. But I do have to say he did have a really good season outside of that as well. 146 yards and a touchdown against Washington, 122 yards and a touchdown against Oregon State. 7 catches against Notre Dame for 58 yards. Like he was a consistent player, even as teams started to understand the way to attack this Stanford offense is to give him trouble. And I think that I love what they're building right now at Stanford. I think that it was such a unique decision to. I'm blanking right now on the name of the Stanford coach. Came over from
Troy.
Troy Taylor.
Troy,
Troy Taylor. There we go.
Troy
There we
Taylor,
go.
yeah.
Coming over from
Sac State coach.
Coming over from Sac State, he had a reputation for doing things dynamic and just a little different, and it probably was just about the right time to move away from the power stuff that Stanford became known for. I think it's just getting harder to do, but they're slowly and quietly building a tremendous collection of talent on the offensive side of the ball. I think that I think that people don't realize how well this team continues to recruit under Troy Taylor, even after moving on from David Shaw. They had the number 31 high school recruiting class coming in, and they've like slowly started to add one or two legitimate players via the transfer portal as well. And that is a difficult thing to do for a program like Stanford. So I think though that Alike Eomanor, he is just one of those players who is a place to start on offense. And look, I think his numbers might go down next year because teams will just defend him so aggressively, but his impact is going to be felt every single play.
Yeah, I think that's a great choice, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he turns out at Stanford, because it's weird to see Stanford kind of in this transition. But he would Coach Troy Thomas was such a great coach at Sacramento State, and a team that historically was not that great in I think they're in the Big Sky. He got them turned around and made some exciting matchups, especially, people forget that, like, the FCS rivalries. One of the ones no one talks about is actually UC Davis and Sacramento State, because for those who don't know, UC Davis is like 30 minutes away from Sacramento, and Sacramento developed kind of weird. It's almost like it's built on the coast, but it's landlocked. So West Sacramento is tiny, and then the whole city, which is well over 1 million people. I mean, they have obviously an NBA team with the Kings. They can support pro ball. It just goes east forever and ever and ever. And I know this just because a long time ago I used to see someone at UC Davis. I'd fly in the Sac airport and we'd go there, and it's like, hey, do you want to go? Well, for dinner, let's go to Sacramento, which seems crazy, but
The big
it's
city.
a college town. It's actually, well, and that's the thing. Davis is somehow a college town that is only half an hour. It's like the only college town in California. There are no real college towns, in my opinion. I mean, I know some of you Cal States might start harumphing, but for reals here. Because I mean, USC and UCLA, Cal, Berkeley, most of the
Santa
UT,
Cruz was lovely, and that school is built right into the side of a mountain. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. So, but kind of my next one, and this is, again, I'm going with the quarterback again, only because he kind of changed the vector of this team, a team that people were wondering if it's an ACC program, the Conference of Quarterbacks, no less, as we've heard. But I think the problem is he's going to be behind several other quarterbacks in terms of most of the conversation. However, Kyron Drones, obviously started at Baylor. He ends up at Virginia Tech. And suddenly when they put him in there, the offense came alive. And Brent Pry's team suddenly became a factor. And now Virginia Tech has kind of gone back to it. Now, we're not saying it's not the peak Virginia Tech program here, but they've become a credible program again. One who their progression in the ACC, people are going to be paying attention to, and one where Drones, who obviously, he threw for over 2,000, rushed for over 800, was a big part of that. So I think Virginia Tech, especially as a program right now, people are going to be tuning in to see how Kyron Drones plays, and he's going to be a big factor in that, even if he isn't necessarily going to be, at least initially in the conversation, as one of the top quarterbacks in his own conference, let alone in college football.
I'm gonna. This isn't my pick. I want to group though Haynes King in with Kyron Drones because I think that both of them have a really fascinating story to tell. Which is, they landed at really good programs that were winning at the time, and it just. I think that when you have so much focus on you in the short term to try to succeed, it can limit your growth. Both of these players ended up at programs that were in the midst of rebuilding and got to work through stuff. They got to make mistakes. And now we get to see them kind of turn into really dynamic players. Kyron Drones, everything changed at Virginia Tech when they put him in the starting lineup because they just needed something dynamic in their lineup, frankly. Defensively, they were moving up and on, but offensively, they just couldn't get out of their own way, and they couldn't do anything that essentially caused issues for opposing defenses. Kyron Drones was that piece, and I'd say the same thing about Haynes King, right? Like it just the way that he threatens the field is huge.
And Georgia Tech, we haven't mentioned he's the quarterback at Georgia Tech.
At Georgia Tech, like the way that he just changes the field is so huge for that team. And so, I think that again, they're different players in different circumstances, but I think that their paths to getting where they are overlap a lot. I will say, hilariously, we have out of our picks so far, I think we're up to 14 picks, and almost half of them are from the ACC. I don't. There's just a coincidence, but yeah, we're. I think the big thing is that one, so many of the quote unquote guys in the SEC are already known. Like they just aren't like. There's not a whole lot of unturned stones at that point, and there's so much unknown in the ACC as well. I think that that's part of what's made it so fun. But because that, let's take it back a little bit. Let's take it back to some of our old reliable type teams. I'm gonna go to Oklahoma, and I'm gonna take Nick Anderson, the wide receiver at Oklahoma. I actually think he should have had a bigger season last year. Like I was surprised, relatively speaking, how infrequently he was targeted. Because when he played and when he was healthy and when he was at his best, he was at times Oklahoma's best offensive player. You saw in the last couple games of the year, right? 7 catches, 73 yards in the bowl game, 4 catches for 97 yards, including a 50-yard bomb against TCU, 119 yards against West Virginia. I think that he just gives them that downfield threat that they haven't had with much consistency since Lincoln Riley left town. And, even last year, I mean, Drake Stoops turned into a great player, but that's not a guy who I think that you want to be your top receiver playing in a like a point and shoot type offense, right? Like a veer and shoot. And I think that I expect it to be a little less structured that way under Seth Littrell, but Nick Anderson is one of those players who can take the top off of a defense, and especially with a first-year starting quarterback in Jackson Arnold, I think that having those playmakers who can get open and get in space and make the game easy, it's going to be even more important. For people who are longer time college football fans, you might remember the name Rodney Anderson, the running back at Oklahoma. This is actually his little brother, which is kind of cool. So he actually has stepped up and been a big time player for Oklahoma. And I think if Oklahoma figures things out offensively, because I do have some kind of existential questions about what they're going to be able to do because of the turnover on that team, I think Nick Anderson's going to be right at the center of it.
No, I like that choice. I'm also going to go with an SEC team, I guess, this time. It's so funny. We're just talking about that. I looked at my list. I'm like, I think I have at least 2 SEC players left to talk about. And this is going to go with Kentucky. And I'm going to go with Barian Brown, a wide receiver and kick returner. Now, it's interesting to see how it goes. Obviously, they've got a Georgia transfer QB with Brock Vandagriff, who's going to be chucking the ball at him. And Barian Brown as a wide receiver has been a little more inconsistent. That's something I know they want to see improvement on. I believe Mark Stoops talked about that a bit at SEC Media Days, seeing some improvement there. But where his electricity comes from is a return man, and that can change the nature of the game. And I think he's, I believe, the fastest returning player right now to college football. I think they clocked him in at 22.6 miles an hour last season. And with some of, I think, the Texas departures, that may make him the fastest remaining currently right now. So this is an opportunity. I mean, he was a good returner he was a good, decent contributor his freshman season. Last season, we saw him kind of step up, and especially being able to do some good return game. And I think this is a season where he could really take off for Kentucky and make the offense a real interesting thing to play. Because again, we talked about it a little bit beforehand. Before we fired this up, I was at one point debating about their nose guard Deion Walker, but I thought, okay, he's a little too prominent. I think he might even make a preseason list or something like that. So I went on the other side of the ball, and I think again, Barian Brown is someone who could make Kentucky. Who would be an exciting person to watch.
I love it. No. He was a big time player, and it's like you mentioned that name, and I'm like, oh, I guess like you kind of I kind of think of him as like an everyone knows him kind of guy, but it's like I guess really not, because he is a little bit
It's
hidden.
Kentucky. It's
Yeah,
unfortunate,
exactly,
but yeah.
exactly, right. And so no, that's a really good pick. He was such a big part of what they did last year. And by the way, like the I don't know what Brock Vandergrift's going to be for this team. I don't know for sure. If he's an improvement, if he's an upgrade, like that changes a whole lot about what Barian Brown has a chance to be in the Southeastern Conference this year. So I like it a lot. I'm gonna go. I guess I'll stay in Appalachia a little bit. I don't know. I don't know the geography if it's good enough. Is Lexington even in Appalachia? That's a whole other question. Yeah, I know that Lexington's probably not. Kentucky's on the border. This is a conversation for some vice presidential candidates, I'm sure. Jaheim White, the running back from West Virginia, definitely a state that's in Appalachia, by the way. But
Yes.
Jaheim White, playing next to CJ Donaldson, who's kind of like the giant power back for West Virginia. Jaheim White is kind of that like do everything playmaker. They used him certainly out of the backfield. He had 109 carries. They also threw in the ball a reasonable amount, and he actually had a 75-yard touchdown at one point. I'd love to see him get more involved in the in sort of the screen passing game and create opportunities for himself, but he's he's a short guy, but real stocky, real physical. He's able to fight through contact. Had 842 rush yards last year, by the way, on 7.7 yards per rush attempt, which is absurd, like crazy. And I think that the emergence of Jaheim White was a big part of why West Virginia was able to have that jump. Because everybody knew this offensive line was going to be really good, and that will be a factor. Their offensive line is going to take a small step back after losing their center Zach Frazier. But I think when you add Jaheim White as a slightly more dynamic piece next to the physical marvel of CJ Donaldson, so I think long term that's going to have a chance to be really, really good.
Yeah, excellent pick. I think West Virginia is one of those programs that we don't think about enough, especially when we're doing some of this stuff. And I think Neil Brown's got a real opportunity there to build something, and he's going to be a key part of that and make them worth watching. And they've got some exciting games, certainly, as the season begins. I'm going to go. We talked about this at the outset. I said there are some players also that make you want to tune in games that aren't always on Saturdays. So there's one guy we're going to get a chance to see on 2 Fridays, and one of those games is going to be absolutely, I think, a must-watch G5 game, and that's Byron Brown, quarterback of South Florida.
This is a great pick. This is a great pick.
Yeah, dual threat quarterback. I mean, they were able to Alex Golish, the head coach, and with Brown as a quarterback, were able to snap a 5-year bowl drought. He threw for 3,200 yards, 7.7 yards an attempt, 26 touchdowns, 809 yards on the ground, with 11 touchdowns on the ground. So October 11th, they're going to be playing against Memphis. That's going to be, I think, in particular, one of those really interesting games in the American, which has a strong chance of ascending that team into the 12-team playoff among the G5 programs. And then, it isn't, the opponent may not seem as exciting, but they've started to get snippy, and that is FAU, because FAU has decided to step up and call out South Florida as being a rival. And Tom Herman's team on November 1st, they're going to be playing in Boca Raton. It'll be fun to see how that one goes. But I think Brown is going to be an exciting player to watch. And at least those 2 Fridays, I encourage our listeners to maybe give those games a look.
I love it. No. That is a really, really good pick. You mentioned FAU. I was talking with some folks. I was at AAC Media Days last week, and the FAU contingent. And granted, these are people who are around the team, so they get the story directly from the source. But people are real optimistic about what this team has a chance to be in 2024, and this rivalry is so good for both of these programs, right? Just to have that team in the state of Florida playing at your level that wants to compete. But I think that Byron Brown, he is one of those players who I almost like. It's just thrilling the fact that he came back to South Florida. I think he absolutely could have had opportunities to land in other places if he desired. And so I'm really thrilled that he decided to come back to college football. So I do think it's funny you pick Barian Brown and Byron Brown back to back. You get all those B's in with those guys. So I do appreciate that. That does take me to my last pick, and there are so many guys who I want to mention. It's. We'll have an opportunity to talk some honorable mentions certainly, but again, I want to try to balance out our list a little bit. We got 3 from the SEC, we've got 6 from the ACC. What we don't have is an independent, and I'm going to go back to one of my old reliables. I'm going to go with Jaden Greathouse, wide receiver at Notre Dame. I've probably talked more about Jaden Greathouse than almost any national podcaster because I remember him playing with Cade Klubnik at Austin Westlake as a sophomore, and everybody telling me this is the next big thing. And he goes to Notre Dame, has some really good games, but on a team that wasn't all that consistent passing the ball, frankly. And I would love to see him become a bigger part of this offense in 2024. He's the complete package at receiver. 6'1", 215 pounds, has the ability to go long, has the ability to be a possession guy, can play inside, can play outside. I think he's just a complete player. And Notre Dame last year did not have a single player go over 500 yards receiving. And that's just not going to do it. And actually, if you go the year before that, the only guy who went over 500 was Michael Mayer, the tight end, right? So, they haven't had a receiver who really was any sort of threat, you could say, since 2021. And so I think that Jaden Greathouse, when they landed him, I felt like this is the type of player that Notre Dame has not been getting. And now he comes in. I think it's going to be huge. And the other piece as well is that Mike Denbrock as offensive coordinator coming over from LSU, that's just a game changer to me in the way that they're going to be able to scheme out that passing game. So I really like this player. I really like the position that he's in. And also, by the way, if some things work out right, he could have a huge impact on the playoff race.
That's a great pick. I think, especially with the last season, also Sam Hartman didn't reach the elevation they were hoping for. I think this is a real opportunity to see someone like Greathouse step up and make that Notre Dame. We're going to get a real chance. I think a lot of people are going to be tuning in to watch that Texas A&M game. So we're going to get to see Notre Dame and how this all works out quite early. My final one, and it's so funny, as we've been talking, I've been debating about who I want to pick, and we'll get to our honorable mentions. But this is someone who I think he's exciting. I don't know if anyone's necessarily thought that he's going to be an All-American candidate, but certainly if the team is going to work, it's going to fall on his shoulders. And he was used as part of a tandem last season at the quarterback position. Avery Johnson, the quarterback for Kansas State. Because again, dual threat quarterback. They mostly used him as a runner last season. Now they're going to put the offense on his shoulders. So again, K-State, we've talked about how open the Big 12 is, but they are certainly one of those leading candidates. What the first, not the first among equals, but the first tier among equals that we're expecting to see one of the champions emerge from. And if they do, it's going to be Avery Johnson, and it's probably going to be a lot of fun to watch because he is a fun player. I remember when people were getting into the hype before EA College Sports came out with the football game. He was going to be one of those players to choose because people are going to realize this is a really fun player. And I almost thought of do we pick the players based on the EA Sports players that fans have so far found that they like to play that aren't necessarily the big names, but I wasn't quite sure how to quantify that. But Avery Johnson does fit into that category.
Yeah, 100%.
And again, by the way, I just want to say, I'm not one of the people that bought the game. I know I get too addicted to it, but my goodness, did that game end up being a hit?
Yes,
over 2 million people pre-ordered the game to play early at $100 a pop. So you got $200 million on that particular group. And they've sold enough that EA has said that, I mean, the rumors coming out of they have cleared $500 million on this game.
Yeah.
Now, they were hoping for apparently under 200 million would be a success.
Yeah.
And look at where they're at now. Now, again, 11-year break will do that.
Yes.
I don't know if we're going to suddenly see year by year, but my goodness, I'm just going to set that aside. I just wanted to get that comment out there because
I'll say, you mentioned that you didn't get it because you knew you'd be a little addicted. So I've got it, but I have only played Play Now. I have not tried to start recruiting. I have not tried to start a road to glory. I just am I can't, not right now, not as the season's right about to start. Yes. I'm more just hey, let me find some fun, good players. So I mentioned I used a lot of Jaden Ott at Cal. Actually, their receiver, Mikey Matthews, who transferred from Utah. I did some damage with that kid. So I'm more trying to find the players that I like. I had a lot of fun with Nick Scornson, the edge rusher who I've talked about from Texas A&M. So I'm trying to not let it take over my life since I have a 6-month-old at home. So it's been a lot of Play Now and not a lot of anything that I actually have to commit time to.
Smart. Very smart. Oh, my goodness. Well, let's see here. I guess, did we go through everybody? Yeah, we did. Give me some of your honorable mentions.
Yeah. I mean, so many, right? I kind of took the pair of Kobe Bryant to Melo Dotson and the Kansas defensive backfield together. They were preseason All Big 12 first team selections, but I want people to understand this is not a Kansas defense of 2014. This is a pretty decent. They're not going to be elite. They're not going to, be top 20 in defense or anything, but they have the ability to cause some issues. One player, again, we got very ACC heavy, so I ended up passing on, was Jordan Waters, the running back at NC State. There's been so much talk about the other guys, the receivers, the quarterback, some of the defensive guys that they brought in, but I think that Jordan Waters was one of the more underrated players in the ACC last year when he played at Duke and now is staying in the research triangle to potentially have a chance to go there. I'm fascinated to see, and I will say he hasn't officially won the starting job, but DeQuan Finn over at Baylor, that is just one of those players who I feel gives them such a floor that they didn't have last year with his running ability. So I'm really, really excited to see what he has a chance to do there. And so I think, those were the three big ones that I had, but I mean, I really just, there's so many teams that we haven't talked about. Nicholas Harbor is another one, the wide receiver from South Carolina. People might remember his viral track time. He's the humongous guy who ran a 9.98 as a high schooler. Now he plays wide receiver for South Carolina. So, you just look up and down college football. There's so many unturned stones that I'm excited to get revealed next year.
I think those are great choices. It's funny, when I was debating about Bear Alexander, I also was thinking of Walter Nolan, only because can he reach his heights at Ole Miss, and especially if the Ole Miss defensive line can kind of finally start to take off. Kyle McCord, just was interested to see how he might end up at Syracuse. Nico Iamaleava, obviously at Tennessee. Dylan Raiola, it's freshman, so it's kind of weird to even. I was like, true freshman. I'm not going to go that way, but
it's a lot of
pressure.
Be interesting to watch. Pressure.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. And again, Nebraska, I want to make sure I'm going to hold any judgment on Nebraska quarterback play until a few games are under their belt. Ismail Mahdi, we talked about him a little bit before the show. Texas State, he actually got a first team nod, I realized, as a returner. So that's why I kind of decided to move him off my list.
I would like to take credit for that. I feel like I drove the All-America conversation on Ismail Mahdi.
I love it. And again, I love the fact his name is Mahdi because I just keep wanting to make Dune references like the Lisan Al-Gaib of running backs. You just have to have get Stilgar out there, ranting about him. But and then there's some others like Miller Moss, Jalen Daniels. Were kind of also two quarterbacks I was thinking about, but they just felt a little too. I mean, they're big enough names right now, and we know
too
how
mainstream.
Yeah, a little too mainstream. We're trying to go hipster here, our hipster team. I mean, I actually had a friend I asked a friend, who should I pick? And I shouldn't ask my West Point friend because he always ends up with Army guys. He's like, Tyrell Robinson, the running back. I'm like, that might be actually, well, first of all, we expect the running back at Army. That's not. Like,
The only question is which one is it going to be? I'm going to say two more Big Ten players real quick. One, Aiden Childs, the quarterback at Michigan State, coming over from Oregon State. He is going to be
tremendous
a
talent.
lot of fun in that offense. And I'm going to buck the trend, and I'm going to pick an Iowa offensive player. Luke Lachey, the tight end, legitimately a very good player. I don't know if they're going to be able to get him the ball enough times to make it interesting. I think that he got hurt in like game 3 last year, and he still ended up number 3, I believe, on the team in receiving yards as a tight end. So like, if he's healthy, this is another sort of Iowa tight end coming through who has a chance to be pretty special.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to just wrap us up with just a quick remind everyone who we named, at least in our
You
top
don't want to
10
just
list.
keep playing Remember Some Guys?
Well, and the thing is, I'm amazed we didn't have any real overlap. We had guys each of us had considered, but never overlapped. And so the first half of our show, where I led off, it was KJ Jefferson, and then Shehan picked Caden Salter, Kyle Monaga, Max Brosmer, Xavier Restrepo, Jordan Hudson, again, SMU, Thomas Castellanos of Boston College, Ahmed Hassanian of Boise State, Bear Alexander, USC, Abu Sama III of Iowa State. We reversed order in the second half. Sean led with Torian York of Texas A&M, Jay Knott, running back of Cal, Alec Iona Moore, the wide receiver from Stanford, Kyron Drones, the great quarterback at Virginia Tech, Nick Anderson, wide receiver at Oklahoma, Barrion Brown, the wide receiver kick returner at Kentucky, Jaheim White, the running back of West Virginia, Byron Brown, USF quarterback, Jaden Greathouse, wide receiver of Notre Dame, and Avery Johnson, the quarterback for Kansas State. What a great list. Lots of good players to watch. Again, it just speaks to how much talent there is in this sport that is the sport so many of us love. So I'm going to take this second to thank all of you for listening to us. Thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure if you get a chance to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show. He's Shehan J. Raja. You can find his work at cbssports.com and at Shehan J. Raja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hayeri. Thanks for listening.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.